Hello there. Welcome to part two. We are delving a little deeper into the exciting adventures of those crazy Sumerians of Mesopotamia, Bronze Age, end of the Neolithic Age. We're just going to get right into it. There were thousands of cuneiform tablets found in and around what is now modern Iraq. And there are all these stories about the goddess Inanna. Like she was front and center, one of the most profound aspects of Sumerian myth and ritual and politics, as we're going to see. So I'm going to share the screen with you. And yeah, so one of the things that happens with Inanna is the fact that the Sumerian Pantheon, which is gods and goddesses of ancient Sumer, is so beloved by all of the different regional and then infiltrating groups that come after Sumer, like the Akkadians, who at one point coexist pretty easily and naturally with Sumerians. They, after a while, begin to assimilate Sumer, and like the Romans did with the Greeks, right? They kept the gods and goddesses. They extolled the stories of Inanna. And one of the ancient scribes who wrote down dozens of these cuneiform tablets about Inanna was an ancient priestess, and her name was Enheduanna. And she was basically, Inanna was like her patron goddess. Enheduanna, her father, was Sargon, who was supposedly the first ruler, going back here, the first ruler of Akkad, which is the first to fully overtake Sumer around 2300 BC. Enheduanna was like the Shakespeare of her day. I'm going to read you a few lines, and you can see in the module I've loaded some pages of a couple of different hymns or poems to Inanna, which is basically a couple of her stories. We're going to talk about them in a minute. But her poetry lasted for a long time. Let me just see real quick, make sure I have this. 136. Yeah, so let's start talking a little bit about one of the myths. And I think it's probably smart to just go in and start talking about the very beginning, which is literally the very beginning, which is the story of the very beginning. It's one of the first creation myths we have on record. It actually is the world's first recorded tale of Genesis. Now, I don't make this claim lightly, and I don't make this claim to tell you, well, first means it's more primitive and it was developed better later by the Hebrews, yada, yada. No, these were Semitic peoples. This was already kind of a Hebrew in the making, but the art, the thinking, the sophistication of the story, of the poetry, of the lines recited is just, it can realistically portray the relationships between a man and a woman. It could show you these aspects of what it was to be frightened and what it was to come into full blossoming adulthood, and what the shamanic journey, remember the shaman from the Paleolithic, right? The idea of a man and a woman still representing the goddess. That is, remember, myths from the Neolithic are crystallized. So those stories preserve some of this goddess culture, even though so much of the goddess culture has been wiped out by these invading bands of migrants traveling across thousands and thousands of miles over thousands of years to conquer older culture. So now you have something written down and preserved in stone, literally. These are clay tablets from a cylinder seal rolled out, and it shows wonderful imagery about presenting someone who's praying to a god or goddess. It shows wonderful mythologizing of farming and husbandry and all these different things. So it really takes an account of really everyday existence, but it also shows you the magic of how things got started. So you can read along with the poem that I've uploaded in the module about the Halupo tree if you wanted, and I don't even have the whole thing in there. But I will read, in the first days, in the very first days, in the first nights, in the very first nights, in the first years, in the very first years. Gosh, that is a lot of repetition. Why do we have all this repetition in there? Well, there's no rhyme in Sumerian poetry, but the intricate patterns of similar and alternating sounds of vowels and consonants there's a richness, and it plays to Sumerian that's not available to us, right? Because these are translated words, the best we could get from Diane Wolkstein, who was the storyteller who helped Kramer develop these translated little wedgy squiggles into something that could be meaningful to us. But it's still subjective, I would think, right? Anyway, there was all of this poetry about the very first days, meaning in the beginning. That's what they're trying to say here. And they're trying to build on that. So there's a lot of ways to look at the first few lines of the Halupo tree. In the beginning, when heaven and earth moved away from one another. So telling, right? Because in the world of the Neolithic and the world of the Paleolithic, the goddess was all of everything, the celestial skies, as well as the earth, as well as the sacred underground that was regenerative. The soul regenerated underground when it was buried. Tomb equals womb, right? And so now that was a time when both heaven and earth were one. But now this is a time as patriarchy infiltrates the old mother goddess belief system. Now heaven is separate from earth. And there's a lot of myths we're going to be talking about the next couple of weeks that have to do with that. But in this creation that separates those two things, there is nothing. There is suddenly everything is needed to be brought into being. Bread was baked in the shrines of the land. Bread was tasted in the homes. Heaven moved away from earth. And so the name of man was fixed. Does that sound familiar, right? Because to name something is to bring it into consciousness, it's to bring it into something that's intentional. So you've got in the story, the very beginning of the story, this is a few pages in, Ereshkigal, as the old mother goddess, is now becoming supplanted by the father god. And in the Sumerian Pantheon, it's Enki, god of wisdom, and he's doing the shamanic journey thing. He wants to go into the land of the underworld, which is taking his boat, his watery boat. Sometimes water represented the underworld, going under. And he's getting like tossed with like all these things from the underworld are trying to attack him because it's Ereshkigal and it's the goddess and she's trying to still hold on to some of her dominion. So this is the mythologizing of patriarchy. Enki, god of wisdom, going down underneath, and Ereshkigal pushing back, like, don't take my domain. You gave me this little piece of leftover earth. Leave me alone. So at the very beginning, the onrushing turtles and hailstones were hurled against him. The waters of the sea churned back and forth. This is Ereshkigal, like, rah. So there's this pummeling between the two of them. And all this pressure of these two forces, duality is born. And good and dark and white and light and this and that and he and she. And suddenly, out of this friction comes a tree, the Halupo tree. Little tree. It is the first thing that is ever, as it says in the poem, when Ereshkigal was given the great below for her domain, the god of wisdom, Father Enki, set sail for the underworld, and the underworld rose up and attacked him. But at that time, a tree was planted, a single tree. That's what came out of it. It was planted by the banks of the Euphrates, right? Where is that? Ancient Sumer. And the south wind pulled at its roots and ripped at its branches. And the waters began to carry it away. And then Inanna appeared and said, but wait, I will rescue this tree. I will save this tree because I need to use it. I need to create civilization with it. But here's what my civilization looks like. She's still a girl at this point. I'm afraid of womanhood. I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to have to be the queen someday. I'm going to have to be accepting what people expect of me. So she saves the tree. And she realizes, oh my gosh, I love this tree, but there are these things in it. That's again is the mark of patriarchy. There's a bird in it that won't leave. And there's a snake in it that's made its nest in this tree. Whoa, what is a girl to do? Now, both those images, remember, we've studied all of the animals in goddess mythology were representative of goddess culture. So now those symbols need to shift. Those symbols here become fearful for our young queen. And so she says, oh, woe is me. What will I do? I'm going to care for the tree, but I don't know how to charm the serpent. I don't know how to use this tree for myself. So she asks her gallant friend, note about brother, sister, father, son, a couple of things, just like you're saying, hey, brother, how's it going? Hey, sister, how are you? Might not be a literal sister, right? Just like translation, we are limited. Inanna calls her friend Gilgamesh her brother, but he's not really her brother. He's just a close friend. And he even wants to marry her. And she says, no. But they're really good friends at this point. And this moment of creation and this moment of Sumerian history. All right? Remember that. Gilgamesh comes, he's got this nice little conversation with her. And she's like, okay, I've saved this tree. I brought it to my garden. The tree is saved, but I want to make a throne and I want to make a marriage bed with this tree, with the trunk or with the wood of this tree. And so Gilgamesh comes and says, I will do it for you, lady. And so he does, and he makes for her a throne and a bed. And that is part of the story. And the snake, he lifted his bronze axe, the axe of the road, weighing 7 talents and 7 minas to his shoulder. I don't know what that means. He entered Inanna's holy garden. Gilgamesh struck the serpent who could not be charmed, and the bird flew with the young to the mountains. Let's see, Gilgamesh loosened the roots of the lupa tree, and from the trunk of the tree, he carved a throne for his holy sister. From the trunk of the tree, he carved a bed for Inanna. The roots of the tree, anyway, it goes on and on and on. So, the halupa tree. You've got your idea of a very early story of a man and a woman in a tree and a snake in a tree. Does it sound familiar? Well, sure. So, but Gilgamesh here is seen very much, and they do think he was a historical figure, by the way. He's seen very much as a good friend and a confidant to Inanna. He helps her. And she then gains her power, accepts the sacred me, which is the laws, the tablets, in order to rule. And she goes on these journeys. She is the morning and the evening star in the stars. We call it the planet Venus today. She comes to Earth and decides, I'm going to carve this throne and this bed, and I'm going to take a lover. But sorry, it's not you, Gilgamesh. And he's like, okay, that's cool. I'm down with that. Instead of the mighty Gilgamesh, who's so strong and helpful, she chooses the shepherd, Dumuzi, who she falls in love with. And so, let's see, 143. Let me tell you a little bit about Gilgamesh really quickly. Oh, I think I have it. Nope. Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is the brazen young hero, full of his manliness. Remember, a hero, right? Signs of his physical strength: heavy axe, which weighs 450 pounds, his great armor, which weighs 60 pounds, but he also acts in the role of the hero king. This hero king is a civilizing task, which he performs. Let's see, and what you're going to find out a little bit later, remember we go Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian. When we get to Babylon, you're going to see a different Gilgamesh. You're going to see a different creation myth. You're going to see a whole new relationship between Gilgamesh and Inanna. Because by the time it becomes, and this is important, by the time the Babylonians are worshiping Inanna, she is now a different goddess, and she's called Ishtar. Kind of like when the Greeks go to the Romans, and the Romans say, okay, instead of Aphrodite, we're going to call you Venus. Same kind of thing, but they change her up. Her figure changes a lot. We'll get there. So this idea then, we read these different parts of, let's see. So the tree then goes from its wilderness into her holy garden. So she is creating civilization as the tree is manifesting into something that will serve as the throne and the marriage bed. What is the marriage bed? Why do I keep coming back to it? All right. Well, the sacred marriage. Actually, I'm going to say one more thing about it. Hang on. I can't speak enough of this idea of Gilgamesh. In old Babylonian Gilgamesh epic, what's going to happen is Gilgamesh is going to refuse Inanna's propositions. Suddenly, she's going to want to sleep with him, and it's kind of like reviving the sacred marriage. But Gilgamesh says no to her. And before, there was something called the sacred marriage, and the sacred marriage was an incredible 8,000-year-old ritual between two lovers. And this is something that definitely goes back to the Neolithic, if not before. It's the idea of Inanna going from the queen of heaven, queen of the stars, to the earth, taking a lover. The lover here is Dumuzi, the shepherd. And it is a symbolic ritual conducted by the priestesses of Inanna's temple and the king, who has divine right to rule. You'll see this in a lot of different mythos or different cultures, and it represents this time where women had an exceptional amount of power when it came to religious rituals. Sexuality was seen as something very sacred. Sexuality had to do with the anatomical analog of the renewal of the universe. Okay, that's a lot of words. The sacred marriage represented by these two humans sex was what guaranteed that the universe would reinvent itself. Campbell 17. Oh, that's me. Shoot, where did my book go? And then, hang on. Take it up. So the idea, the sacred marriage is a multi-level metaphor with powerful and poetic dimensions of meaning. It's significant that the prime divine figure is not a fertility or mother goddess. She's not doing this to have a baby. Instead, the ritual involves sexual union with the goddess who represents the drive for a romantic coupling or a romantic union. And it gives sexuality a prominent place in the cosmic order as an important pathway to fertility. It leads to humans having babies and animals having babies and the earth renewing itself every spring. And so human sexuality, familiar for its domestic import, was seen as the world's regenerative process. So there is all of this erotic poetry Right. I mean, there's a lot. Okay. It sings about the royal ritual, Dumuzi, enacted by a king who became the god in the performance of this ritual. The king was the avatar of Dumuzi, but at the same time, he was also the human being of the state. This affords women a lot of power to be able to call, their own wishes on if they're going to bestow their love to this particular king. There's a lot of really cool epics um, about the love of Inanna to a king's power. In 2600 BC, that's before the Akkadians, right? There was this Sumerian epic about Enmerkar, a legendary early king, and it emphasizes the importance of love of Inanna and the king's power. These stories tell the relationship between these two cities, and how because they both worshipped Inanna and both kings had a special bond to Inanna, one of which is an epic tradition as a conjugal bond, meaning because they both adored Inanna, both of the kings of each of these cities, they both had their own priestesses, they both worshipped her as a goddess, yada, yada. That was a way for them to maintain brotherly affections, conjugal bond of recognizing we will not harm you, you will not harm us because of our love of this goddess. According to the epic, Enmerkar and the lord of Arata, the king, these two kings, let's see, one said the other one did not please Inanna as well as he did. In Enmerkar, one of the stones, he wanted precious metals and lapis lazuli of this other city. And upon asking Inanna to make Arata submit to him, Inanna advised Enmerkar to send an envoy. As Arata's fortunes rose and fell in the battle of wits that followed, the lord of Arata announced his belief that Inanna had not deserted Arata, that she had not abandoned him, nor delivered it up to the abandon her lord. Ultimately, Arata was forced to agree with trade. In other words, because of this discussion that these two kings had about who was pleasing Inanna the most, the other one said, okay, well, I'm going to, it was like a battle of wits. Who could love Inanna more? Who could show more interest, more devotion, more? And that in itself was a sort of superiority. And it was ingenious because there's these stories about rivalry between these kings. Anyway, so I will stop at that, but I do want to tell you more about some of this wonderful poetry. So basically, they're going to, it's pretty erotic. You ready for this? Okay. So, Inanna spoke. What I tell you, let the singer weave into song. What I tell you, let it flow from ear to mouth. Let it pass from old to young. My vulva, the horn, the boat of heaven, is full of eagerness like the young moon. My untilled land lies fallow. As for me, Inanna, will you plow my vulva? Oh, and it keeps going. And then Dumuzi replies, well, yes, I'll plow your vulva. And then she's like, oh, man of my heart. In Inanna's holy lap, the whole rejuvenative qualities, powers of the earth are bestowed. So they talk about Inanna's holy lap. So all of these metaphors of her being like the flowing milk from the cows, or from plowing her fields as if she's got these fertile fields, and he's the shepherd to do so, or the farmer, whatever. This is what gives not only just a regenerative birth to the universe. Remember, this is based on agricultural imagery, ideas, making the world go round. How do you get to your next agricultural season? How do you have a land of plenty? But it also bestows the right to that ruler that Inanna finds fortune or finds grace and accepts you because you are worshiping her correctly. So this is pieces of how the ancient goddess filters into this new web of design, which is what? The new political system of how rulers rule. But what starts to happen is Sumer gets overthrown again and again and again and again. And Sumer wants to maintain it's this love affair it has with Inanna. But the conquering peoples that began to take over this very lush, beautiful area that's a garden, remember, in between the Tigris and Euphrates, they began to become more and more embedded in warfare, more embedded in conquest. And the leaders, instead of making Inanna happy, it's about military might. How strong, how supremacist, how manly and heroic can you be? That's the kind of leader we need. Ultimately, the face of the idea of the hero god, the hero lover of the goddess, goes from vegetation god to the military might of the warrior. And there's a sadness in that, because all of the other stories then that start to emerge, and as Sumerian myth changes, Inanna changes. Inanna becomes Ishtar. The Babylonian Ishtar is full of rage. She's a sexual goddess. She's still very powerful. And as other goddesses are fading away and becoming very, very secondary characters, and their power being tricked out of their power, becoming wives, mothers, daughters, just a reflection of the patriarchal values, Ishtar becomes more and more intense, enraged, vengeful. And so finally, in one of the epics, the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's very reflective of the fact that they are beginning to announce that, hey, we don't need Ishtar in order to be good in war. I, as the hero, this is what Gilgamesh will say, I am now, no, wait. I am now enough. Sing my virtues. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the one that's most known through Babylonian tales. And he basically has this story. His story is saying, I can do anything I want. And when he does, he gets in a lot of trouble. The gods give him his new best friend, Enkidu. And so they have a lot of adventures together. And maybe we'll get to them a little bit later. But let's finish talking now, shall we, about Inanna and the above and the great below. This is about Inanna's descent. So this ends part 2. I'll see you at part 3.